I was sitting at my son's kitchen table in Austin, holding a quarterly brokerage statement I wasn't supposed to find, when I heard his key turn and the front door lock. He'd run out to grab groceries. I'd told him to take his time. He was gone maybe 20 minutes. That was enough. The statement showed a balance of $3,412,000. My son, who I had been sending $800 a month for the past 2.5 years, my son, who called me last Thanksgiving crying because he couldn't afford to fly home. My son, who I had convinced myself needed me more than anyone else in the world. I set the paper down on the table very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands have started to shake and you don't trust them anymore. He walked in carrying a paper bag with a baguette sticking out the top. He saw my face before he saw the statement. He stopped walking. "Mom," he said. That was all he said. Just Mom. And in the way he said it, I understood that he had known this moment was coming for a long time. Let me go back. Let me explain how a 62-year-old retired nurse from Portland, Oregon, ended up sitting at a kitchen table in Texas feeling like the floor had opened up beneath her. My husband and I were married for 38 years. He was an electrician. I was a nurse. We were not wealthy people, but we were steady people. We paid our mortgage and raised 2 children and went to Crater Lake every summer and argued about whose turn it was to clean the gutters. It was a good life. It was a real life. He died 2 years before any of this happened. Heart attack on a Tuesday morning in March while I was at the grocery store. By the time I got home, he was already gone. The paramedic said it was fast. I kept asking them what that meant. Fast. They kept saying it what that meant. Fast. They kept saying it the same way, like it was supposed to comfort me. It didn't. Grief is strange when you've been with someone for 38 years. It doesn't feel like sadness, not at first. It feels like disorientation. I would wake up every morning and for 3 or 4 seconds I would simply forget. I would reach to his side of the bed and remember, and the remembering was like learning it for the first time all over again. My daughter, my oldest, lives in Seattle with her husband and their 2 kids. She has a career in tech and a beautiful house and a full, busy life. She called me every Sunday. She flew me out for Christmas. She was attentive and loving, and I never doubted for a second that she loved me. But she didn't need me. That was the thing I couldn't say out loud. She had everything handled. She didn't call me on a Wednesday afternoon just to hear my voice. She didn't ask for my advice about our marriage or her job or her friendships. She was 36 years old and she was fine, genuinely fine. And I was so proud of her and also, in a way, I was ashamed of. So unnecessary to her. My son was a different story. He was 32 when his father died and he took it hard. He'd been in Austin for 5 years by then, playing in a band, working odd jobs, doing what he always called figuring things out. He and his father had a complicated relationship, the kind fathers and sons sometimes have when neither of them quite knows how to say what they mean. They'd been doing better in the last few years. They'd started calling each other more. And then suddenly, there was no one left to call. He flew home for the funeral and stayed 2 weeks. We watched old home videos together and went through his father's tools and decided, without either of us really deciding, that my son would take the old fishing rods. He cried in the garage holding one of those rods for a long time, and I stood next to him with my hand on his back. When he went back to Austin, the house was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator from the bedroom. He started calling more often after that, sometimes twice a week. He told me about the gigs that weren't coming in, the band that was losing members, the roommates he couldn't afford to keep up with. He'd always been the child who struggled a little more, who needed a little more guidance. His sister landed on her feet. He was still looking for the ground. About 6 months after his father died, he called me on a Friday night. His voice sounded different. Smaller. He said his landlord was raising the rent and he couldn't cover the difference. He asked if I could help him just this month, just until he got more work. He said he hated asking. He said he didn't know who else to call. I told him not to be silly. I told him I would transfer the money that weekend. The next month it was his car registration. The month after that, a trip to the emergency room for something with his knee. Then it was his recording equipment because someone in a new project needed him to bring his own gear, or they'd find someone who could. Each time he called, I could hear how much he didn't want to be asking. He always said he'd pay me back when things picked up. I always told him to stop worrying about that. My best friend thought I was losing my mind. She'd been my friend since our daughters were in kindergarten together, and she did not mince words, which was usually what I loved about her. "You're retired," she said to me one morning over coffee at her kitchen table. "You've got your pension and his father's life insurance, and that's it. You can't keep sending money you might need. He's my child. He's 33 years old. He's struggling. Is he, though?" She looked at me over her mug. "Because he sounds pretty comfortable to me. Comfortable enough that he keeps calling and asking." I told her she didn't understand. She told me I was using the word struggling a lot for someone who couldn't see his bank account. My daughter said something similar, less directly. She asked me once, on one of our Sunday calls, how things were going with her brother. I gave her a brief answer and she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Mom, you know you're allowed to say no to him." I told her I knew that. She said, "Okay, I just want to make sure." She didn't push it, but the words stayed with me in a way I didn't examine too closely. I kept sending the money. $800 a month had quietly become $1,200, then $15. Then there were months with extra transfers for things that came up. In 2.5 years, I sent him somewhere between $40,000 and $50,000. I didn't add it up. I didn't let myself add it up. What I let myself feel instead was useful, needed. There was a purpose to my mornings again. On the days he called, I was lighter. I would tell my best friend about our conversations in a way that, looking back, must have seemed strange. The way you talk about something that is giving your days their shape. My husband had been the one who needed me in visible ways. A bad back that needed ice packs. Strong opinions about his dinner that somehow translated into wanting me in the kitchen with him. A fear of flying that meant every vacation was a road trip that required a navigator and a co-pilot and a lot of map reading from the passenger seat. He was a capable man, and I don't want to make him sound helpless because he wasn't, but he needed me in the small particular ways that make a marriage feel like a partnership. And then he was gone, and the house echoed, and my son called from Austin. I drove down to Austin in September to surprise him for his birthday. I'd been planning it for weeks. I bought a chocolate cake from a bakery near his apartment building. The kind he'd loved since he was a kid. The kind with the dark ganache frosting. I had his spare key because he'd given it to me the last time I'd visited, in case of emergencies, in case he ever locked himself out. I told myself I would set everything up before he got home from his rehearsal and he would walk in and be surprised. He wasn't home when I arrived. I let myself in and put the cake in the refrigerator and looked around his apartment. It was nicer than I'd expected, not extravagant, but nice. A good couch, a large television, a kitchen that looked recently renovated. I told myself he probably had a decent few months. I told myself I was glad. I was looking for the card I'd sent him, the birthday card. I'd wanted to see where he'd put it. Sentimental, I know. I was looking around the desk in the corner of his living room and I pulled open the bottom drawer because I thought maybe he'd put it somewhere safe to keep it flat. There was no card in the drawer. There was a manila folder with a brokerage firm's logo on the tab. I don't know what made me open it. Something in me already knew, I think. Some part of me that had been filing away small inconsistencies for months without letting them surface. The apartment. The new truck he was driving when he picked me up from the airport last spring, which he'd said a friend had lent him. The way he'd been slightly evasive when I asked how the music was going lately. Not sad about it, just evasive. I opened the folder. $3,412,000. Plus a second account. Plus what appeared to be a real estate investment in the city of Austin that had appreciated significantly in the past 18 months. I sat down in his desk chair. I heard the refrigerator from the next room. I looked at the paper for a long time. The key turned in the lock. He walked in and saw my face and set the grocery bag down on the coffee table and sat down on the couch across from me and put his face in his hands. "How long?" I said. My voice came out very even, which surprised me. He didn't look up for a moment. When he did, his eyes were red. "About 2 years," he said, "a little over." The story came out in pieces. He had started a small software company with 2 friends a few years before his father died. He'd always downplayed it when I'd asked, told me it was just a side project, nothing serious. 14 months after his father's funeral, the company was acquired. He walked away with just over $3 million after taxes. He hadn't told me. He had meant to. He'd picked up the phone to call me a dozen times and then not known what to say. He'd been afraid, he told me. Afraid I would think differently of him. Afraid the dynamic would change. Afraid I would feel foolish for having sent all that money. "So you kept asking me for it anyway," I said. He looked at the floor. "I didn't know how to stop. Every time I called you, you sounded better. You sounded like yourself again." He looked up at me. "After Dad died, you went so quiet. And then I called needing something and you came back. You sounded like you again. I didn't know how to take that away from you." I stood up from the desk chair. I walked into his kitchen and stood at the window looking out at the parking lot and did not say anything for a long time. He followed me in. He stood in the doorway. "I should have told you," he said. "I know that. I'm not trying to justify it. I just want you to understand it. I spent $50,000, I said. Money that was your father's. Money that I worked 30 years for. I know. I sat in that house every night thinking about whether you were okay. Worried about your knee, your car, your rent. I know, Mom. That was my purpose, worrying about you." The silence after I said that was very different from the silence that had come before it. He didn't say anything. I heard what I had just said. I told him to go for a walk. I needed to think. He left without argument. I called my daughter from his kitchen. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which was not like her. When I finished, she said, "Oh, Mom." Not angry, not vindicated, just sad for me, I think. "He was wrong to lie," she said. "That's absolutely true. But can I say something? Go ahead. I tried to call you more after Dad. I tried to check in more. But you always said you were fine. You never let me in. But you let him in because he came in through the door marked need." She paused. "I think maybe you should talk to someone about this. Not about him. About you." I told her I would think about it. Then I sat on my son's couch and didn't move for a long time. He came back an hour later and we sat at the kitchen table with the baguette he'd never unpacked, and I asked him questions and he answered all of them. The company, the sale, why he'd kept the apartment modest, why he'd kept calling. He said he planned to tell me on this birthday, actually. He said he'd been practicing what to say. He said it was part of why he was nervous about my visit. I told him I needed to go back to the hotel. I drove there alone and sat in the hotel room with the television on and didn't watch it. My best friend called me the next morning. I had texted her the night before with very few details. She arrived at the full picture faster than I expected, because she had always been faster than I gave her credit for. "He lied to you," she said. "That's clear. But I want to ask you something, and I need you to actually answer it." "What?" "When did you feel closest to him these past 2 years?" I didn't answer. "Not when you were talking about the music or his life or his father. When did you feel most like yourself? When did you feel most like yourself?" "When he needed help," I said. She didn't say I told you so. She said, "Yeah, I know." She was quiet for a moment. "You remember last Christmas when I said you should try that grief group at the church and you said you were fine?" "I was fine." "You were sending $1,200 a month to a millionaire and calling it fine." "I made an appointment with a therapist when I got back to Portland. She was a woman about my age, which I hadn't expected to matter to me but did. She had a very calm office and a quality of attention that made it hard to be evasive. In our second session, she asked me when I had started feeling useful again after my husband died. I told her the timeline, the calls, the first transfer. And how did your days feel before that? She asked. I thought about the refrigerator sound. The Sunday calls with my daughter that were warm but short because she was busy and capable and needed nothing. The mornings with the newspaper and the coffee and nothing after the coffee. Empty, I said. And how did they feel after? I knew where she was going. I still had to say it. Full. What did you tell yourself about why you kept sending the money? That he needed it. That I was helping him. Were you helping him? I thought I was. What were you actually doing? The room was very quiet. Outside there was a sound of traffic. Filling something up, I said. She nodded slowly. You had been the person who was needed in that house for 38 years. By your husband in all the small ways. By your children when they were young. And then suddenly you weren't needed by any of them. Your daughter had her life, your husband was gone, and your son called. And I kept him calling. She let me sit with that. I had done to my son something I hadn't been able to see clearly until she named it. Not maliciously. Not with any awareness of what I was doing. But every time he'd mentioned finding work or paying me back or getting things sorted, I had smoothed it over. I had smoothed it over. I had told him not to worry. I had made it easy to keep needing me because I had needed him to need me. We had built a dependency together from both sides, and I had stood there feeling righteous and maternal and necessary, and never once looked at my own hands. I called my son on a Thursday evening, 3 weeks after I got back from Austin. I had been thinking about what I wanted to say for those 3 weeks, and I still didn't have it exactly right, but I called anyway. I've been seeing a therapist, I told him. I know, Sis told me. I'm glad. I need to say something and I need you to let me finish before you say anything. He agreed. What you did was wrong. You lied to me for 2 years. You let me send money I was worried about spending because I thought you were in trouble. You let me believe a story that wasn't true. None of that is something I'm going to wave away because you had reasons. Do you understand that? Yes, he said quietly. But he waited. My therapist asked me something I've been sitting with. She asked me why I made it so easy for you to keep asking, and I've been honest with myself about the answer. I paused. I needed you to need me. After your father died, I didn't know who I was without someone to take care of, and you gave me that, and I held on to it too tight. I didn't want to see the signs that things might be getting better for you, because that would mean you'd stop calling. He didn't say anything for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. I should have been braver, he said. I kept telling myself I was protecting you. But the truth is, I was scared. I thought if I didn't need your help anymore, you'd stop picking up the phone. That I'd lose the version of you I got back after Dad died. That's not how it works, I said. That's not how it's supposed to work. I know. I want a relationship with you where you're honest with me, where I'm not your financial safety net and you're not my sense of purpose. That's not a mother and son. That's two people using each other. The word landed hard in the silence. Yeah, he said. It is. We talked for 2 hours that night about his father, about how we'd each been grieving separately and badly, about the company and why he'd been ashamed of it. Because he'd always been the one who struggled and suddenly succeeding felt like it changed the story of who he was in the family. About the real reason he'd been playing down the music for years, which wasn't that things were going badly, but that he'd quietly realized he didn't actually want to do it professionally. He just wanted to do it for himself, and he'd never figured out how to say that without feeling like he'd wasted a decade. About my husband. About the fishing rods in the garage that were still there. Before we hung up, he said, "Can I come for Thanksgiving this year?" Just come, no drama, no agenda, just Thanksgiving. I said yes. I had one more hard conversation before the holidays. I had it with my daughter on a Sunday call, but a different kind of Sunday call than the ones before. I told her about the therapy. I told her what I had realized about myself. I told her, and this was the hardest part, that I thought I had let her competence become a reason not to let her in. That I had filed her under fine and moved on, and that wasn't fair to her. She was quiet for a long time. I used to feel like I was being penalized, she finally said, for having my life together. Like you and my brother had this whole channel of communication, and I was on the outside of it because I didn't need saving. I'm sorry, I said. I don't want to be the easy one anymore, she said. I want to be able to call you when things are hard and not have you assume I'll handle it. I know. I'm learning. Okay, she said. Then teach me to. Tell me when you're not fine. I want to know. My son came for Thanksgiving. He drove up from Austin, which took 2 days, and he brought his girlfriend, who I liked immediately because she told me without preamble that he had told her everything, and she thought we were both works in progress, which made me laugh in a way I hadn't in a while. My daughter and her family came too. We were all in the kitchen together the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, and it was chaotic and loud, and someone knocked over the cranberry sauce, and the dog got into the rolls, and my son did the dishes without being asked, while my daughter and I sat at the counter and actually talked, about her job and her marriage and the things she'd been worried about with her oldest that she hadn't told me yet. I didn't feel useful in the way I used to need to feel useful, but I felt something better than useful. I felt present. My son and I are still rebuilding. It is not a fast process. He made an account transfer to me in November, which I told him I didn't want, and he told me wasn't a negotiation. We compromised by putting it into a fund for his niece and nephew's education, which felt like the right shape for it. He pays for everything now when we're together. He does it carefully, not showily. He is still learning that being the one who can help doesn't mean anything has changed between us. I am still in therapy. My therapist says I am doing the work, which is her way of saying I'm making progress without being sentimental about it, which suits me. I think about my husband sometimes when I'm doing things he never got to see. My son's girlfriend, the cranberry sauce disaster, my daughter telling me about the things she'd been carrying. He would have sat at the head of that table and eaten too much, and said very little and understood everything. There is a version of this story where I play the victim cleanly, where I am the mother who was deceived, who gave everything and was taken advantage of, who deserved better. That version is satisfying in the way that simple things are satisfying. It is also a lie. The harder version, the true version, is that my son hid his money because he was afraid of losing me, and I let him hide it because I was afraid of being alone. We loved each other badly for 2 years and called it good. We had to break the whole thing open before we could build something that was actually worth having. I am 63 years old. I spent 38 years being needed and 6 months learning to exist without it. I made some terrible choices in that 6 months, and so did my son, and we're going to spend a long time being honest about that. Last month, he sent me a photo of a painting he'd bought for his apartment. Abstract. Lots of blues and greens, the kind of thing his father would have called fancy nonsense, but with a smile. He said it reminded him of the coast. He said he thought I would like it. I called him instead of texting back. He picked up on the second ring. That felt like enough, Doc. That felt like exactly enough.